So we've discussed the Imperial-Class Star Destroyer quite a bit in the last couple weeks, and that trend will continue. Today we're going to look, however, specifically at the disadvantages that the Imperial-Class had as a whole compared to other capital ships of similar size. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So before I begin, I want to just throw out there that today we're going to talk about the disadvantages, and in a future video we will go over the advantages of the Imperial-Class Star Destroyer, and there actually are some key advantages to this class of vessel. But today we will focus on specifically what was wrong with the Imperial-Class Star Destroyer, why it wasn't the perfect ship which the Empire wanted. So let's just jump right in with the most obvious one, their point defense problem. This is present in both the Imperial 1 and the Imperial 2. You see, both versions of the Imperial-Class Star Destroyer were seriously lacking in point defense systems, something that's absolutely crucial if you want to defend against the types of starfighters that the Rebel Alliance uses, a Rebel Alliance that depends very heavily on starfighter tactics. This became a very serious and easily exploited flaw when the Rebels would simply carry out hit-and-run bomber attacks against Imperial capital ships, which, while not necessarily destroying these Star Destroyers, would cripple them and often take them out of action for quite a bit of time. But while the point defense system was a very glaring flaw that was at least partially fixed in the Imperial 2, it wasn't the only downside of the Imperial class. As many people are pretty quick to point out, its bridge is remarkably exposed. However, this seems to be pretty common in most capital ships within Star Wars. Bridges with big windows are basically the norm within the Star Wars universe, so they're usually positioned very outwardly and very prominently. So it's not really surprising that the Imperial-Class Star Destroyer's bridge is located sort of high up on the superstructure in a spot that it could easily survey the entirety of the battlefield. However, this comes with some very serious and obvious disadvantages. We see this design flaw exploited very directly in the Rebel attack on the Executor during the Battle of Endor. The Rebels attacked the Executor by simply focusing their fire on the Executor's very exposed bridge, which was ultimately destroyed by a wayward A-wing that hit its mark. And while this flaw ultimately did end up taking down the mighty Executor, one of the Executor-class dreadnoughts, it is a flaw that's present on every Imperial-class Star Destroyer. But when it comes down to it, the flaw here is less the position of the main command bridge on the superstructure, and more the lack of a secondary command and control center deeper within the vessel that could take over if the command bridge was destroyed. But still, it's worth noting that the designers of the Imperial Star Destroyer went to great lengths to try to protect the bridge, including some of the most advanced shielding on the ship being focused around that command sector. But this brings us to another flaw. Unlike a lot of other vessels where their shield generators are mounted internally, the Imperial Star Destroyer's shield generators, at least for their command section of the vessel, are mounted externally in large shield globes. And well, there could be some very legitimate reasons for this. Perhaps those globes overheat, and it's best to simply put them outside of your vessel to sort of control the heat radiating off of them. It makes them very exposed to attack. Rebel starfighters could easily hit these shield globes to knock out the shields, at least around the command section, if not across the entire vessel. The last big flaw comes down not necessarily to the Star Destroyer itself, but to its fighter wing and its fighter complement. The Imperial-Class Star Destroyer had a moderately sized complement of 72 TIE fighters. These could be anything from the standard TIE LN, standard TIE fighters, to TIE interceptors, to TIE bombers, but they were all TIE series vessels, which had some serious flaws of their own, most notably the lack of a hyperdrive. This meant that when they were arriving in combat, the TIE fighters had to ride the Star Destroyer's hyperdrive into battle, basically forcing them to stay in the hangar of the Star Destroyer until the vessel has arrived at the combat site. This makes combat patrols coming out of hyperspace basically impossible for Imperial forces. This is something that we see the Rebels do a lot, where a Rebel fleet arrives at a battle space with their fighters already deployed and carrying out patrols around their ships. The Empire has to act a little bit slower, having to deploy their fighters after arriving. This further adds to the Imperial-Class Star Destroyer's vulnerability to starfighter attacks. So I think you're starting to see the trend here. A lot of these flaws are amplified by the tactics the Rebel Alliance use, or more appropriately, it was likely the Rebel Alliance choosing to use these tactics to exploit these flaws in particular. Ultimately, the flaws of the Imperial-Class Star Destroyer come down to the gaps in its defenses, not necessarily anything wrong with its offensive complement. But the Imperial-Class Star Destroyer still has a very long and storied history, and there are still pros and positive sides to the Imperial-Class Star Destroyer. And if you'd like to learn about the Imperial class as a whole, the overarching history, design, and story of this class, I'll leave a link up here to my video on that. And I want you to let me know down in the comments whether you think I missed any major flaws of the Imperial-Class Star Destroyer. Is there something else wrong with it that I didn't cover in this video? Let me know down below in the comments. And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars, leave it down below as well. And last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.